Are you noticing your car insurance rate creep up even without tickets or claims? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry handles the legwork by comparing quotes side by side from over 50 top insurers so you can confidently hit buy. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Jerry even tracks rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Don't settle for higher rates. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/libsyn today. That's jerry.ai/libsyn.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a Three Geeks conversation. I'm very happy to be here. For those that don't know who I am, I'm John Orlando. I'm one of the geeks. We're kind of like the Avengers. We have lots of geeks. And joining me here this evening is a man that's a comic book writer, a journalist, a former Marvel researcher, which I want to know all about that. Mr. Kevin Garcia. How are you, Kevin?
I'm doing all right. And I appreciate that it's the three geeks, not necessarily the three nerds. I've always had a distinction in my head between them. People ask me if I'm a nerd. I'm like, if I was a nerd, I'd make a lot more money off it. I'm a geek.
Well, let's jump into it because as soon as I started doing research and I saw that you were a former Marvel researcher, I have to know, what does that actually entail?
So for 10 years, I was part of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe team. And when I talk to people who know comics, they usually know what that is. I talk to people who aren't like deep into the comics. They're like, oh, the encyclopedia. And I'm like, no. The encyclopedia stole from us. The handbooks are the only official place for canon lore. It all goes through the editors. It goes through the writers, the artists, and us. Their job, I say us, I'm not part of it. I was part of that for 10 years, give or take. But the job of the handbooks is to basically make these disconnected comic book stories over 80 years make sense as if it was always intended to be a single whole story. Not always easy. And then to fill in those holes, to make sure things all gel together, we go to the writers, the artists, or if they're not available, the editors, or we'll just say, hey, look, this is what makes the most sense. Can we use this? And the editors will say yes, or the writers say yes, or they'll say no. So like whenever I hear somebody say something like, oh, well, it's not canon, it's only in the handbooks. I'm like, it's canon until a comic book negates it, because that's just the way canon works. Canon in comic books is accurate until it's not. But unless it's explicitly negated, yeah, that's what that is. So I like to tell people I got paid by Disney to read comic books, although I technically worked there before Disney did. So there's that.
Well, you know what? I never knew that such a position even existed. I mean, clearly it's a very important position, but one that maybe doesn't have the flash of some of the other positions in the empire, if you will, of Disney.
Yeah, empire is correct. But I would say if you want to put the importance of it, you've seen the Loki TV show, right?
Yep.
Okay. So Mobius, Owen Wilson's character, is based on the guy that created the handbooks in the 1980s. Mark Gruenwald was an editor back then. He was a young editor at that time, like an assistant editor, but he was obsessed with continuity. He wanted to make sure everything made sense. So much so that when they created a character whose job it was to keep the timeline straight, they based it on him. And he actually died young of cancer, but before he died, he was able to write at least one story about his own character, which I think is great, even though he didn't create the character, other people did. So Mobius is a Marvel editor. And I was so upset when they gave his real name in the show and it was like Don or something. I'm like, no, Mark. All you do is say it was Mark. That's his name. But, so it's not flashy, but hey, they got to be in the MCU. So, yeah.
Well, what more can you ask for?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've also worked on several Marvel titles as well throughout your tenure there.
Yeah, well, mostly it was handbook stuff. I've done also some behind the scenes stuff like writing copy and stuff, which is like ad copy. But I also got to write as characters a few times, which very few times. I got to write as Steve Rogers a couple times. I got to write as who else? I'm trying to remember right now. But the one I'm most proud of is Namor, the First Mutant #1. Where I did the last 8 pages of the book. And what they asked me to do was just, can you give Namor's, at that point, I think 85 year history in 8 pages? And I said, yes, but can I do it as a character? And I ended up doing it as Namora, a woman who's had a crush on him for 80 years. So she is giving his life story in that version. What frustrates me is that if you buy the physical copy, it's totally there. You know, the individual copies, the trade paperback. But if you get the digital one on Marvel Unlimited, they leave out my pages. And I'm
What?
like, no.
Why did they do that?
But I don't know, different reasons. Sometimes they forget. Sometimes they're like, oh, we'll save it for a Saga collection later. But the thing is, I had very little creative freedom at Marvel. So I left Marvel, the handbook team, shortly before the pandemic. And then since then, I've been working either independently or with small companies. So I still love Marvel. I have what I call a party trick whenever I'm at conventions. I tell people, like, just name a random Marvel character. I could probably tell you something weird about them, but I have a lot more creative freedom with the smaller companies so far anyway.
Well, let's talk about some of your creations. Let's talk about Dragon Lee, which is a kid's book that you have right there in your hands. Yeah. So can you give us a little bit of the summary of the project without giving away too much?
Sure. Well, so Dragon Lee obviously is a professional wrestler. He's been part of the WWE for a couple years now, and he's growing in his startup, which I think is really cool. But he comes from a dynasty of luchadors, and like his older brother Rush, spelled Rush, is part of the AEW, and then he's got another older brother, Duralistico, who's also a professional wrestler, and they also go to appearances and things. And their dad was a professional wrestler with the AAA in Mexico, which is basically like the WWE over there. Although now AAA belongs to the WWE because, corporations. But the point is, it is a whole family. So I got approached by this company called the Master Public, which handles IP for wrestlers. And they said, listen, we want to make a book for kids. And I told them, well, here's my pitch. We had a discussion with them. Well, the initial discussion, we have myself and the guy from the wrestling company, and then the publisher's there. And the publisher's like, all right, this is what Dragon Lee would look like without his mask. And I'm like, whoa. He should never have his mask off. Yeah. Because I'll be honest, I'm not a massive follower of wrestling as a sport. I am a connoisseur of wrestling as the mythos. In Mexico, wrestling is an entirely different mythology than it is in the U.S. It has a whole tradition. Like, for example, if you have a masked wrestler, they just never take off the mask at any time. If you watch any Santo movie, you'll see that he's wearing the mask in bed. He wears the mask in the shower. He wears the mask while answering the phone. The mask never comes off because for luchadors, the masks are not about hiding your identity. It's about showing the world who you really are. It's about showing your true power. And when I said that, the wrestling guy, the guy with the IP goes, yes, that's what we want. So in the book, Dragon Lee only has a mask. Oh, it's only maskless for one chapter. And even though it's like it's a textbook, a prose book, even in the narration, no one can see his face except his own family until he gets the mask, because I figured it's tradition. You have to hold up to that. They asked to have the kid. It's the family when they were younger, fighting monsters in Mexico. And initially they thought about doing, movie monsters like Frankenstein. And I said, well, Frankenstein's public domain, but green skin, flat top Frankenstein, that belongs to Universal. So I said, I can do that, but we'd have to change the look of him probably. Or what if I have them fighting creatures from Mexican folklore? And that's what we ended up doing. So every creature they fight in the book is pre-Columbian. They're all creatures that predate the Spanish arrival in Mexico. So no chupacabras, which, by the way, I always remind people, is Puerto Rican.
Well, you know what? I'm glad that you had the opportunity to tell me that story, because I'm a huge wrestling fan. Dragon Lee, I think, is an awesome up and coming wrestler in the WWE, and so I will be honest with you, Kevin. And I was like, is that I was a little bit like not sure if that was the right Dragon Lee or if this was a different character. So I appreciate that. And
can I ask you a question?
I'm sure you've watched a few Santo films, have you?
Oh yeah, I watched quite a few Santo films. But I have a question for you as a fan. So I've worked with wrestlers before because I do a lot of Q&A hosting at Comic Cons and stuff. And before I work with somebody, I always go through some of their footage and stuff. And then with Dragon Lee, I got to see his earlier stuff. I didn't actually get to meet him until a month or two after the book came out, but he was a real nice guy. But my question is this: he was recently in one of the big events that happened about a month or so ago, and in the event he gets choked out. And I was curious, how the fans would react. And I started looking it up, and pretty much every comment I saw was like, "Yeah, he lost really good. He did a great job. He did a great job losing." And I was like, "That's kind of cool." So it seemed like they were really excited by how he was able to sell the loss. And I kind of wanted to know more about what that's like as a fan. I would compare it to comic books, I guess. Like, I know which characters might win or lose, but it's like the actual how good was the story is what I go in for,
And that's exactly it. From a fan's perspective, it's that, we want a good story to be told in the ring. We want that good versus evil, the David versus Goliath. We want that in the ring. And even when you lose, sometimes that's not a bad thing, because sometimes that makes you more popular because, oh gosh, darn it, they didn't quite get it done. So yeah, I see that in comics and pro wrestling, there's so many similarities that it's really kind of eerie, if you will, that there's so many similarities.
100%. I mean, you got the behind the scenes drama, you've got the colorful costumes and names in the middle of the action. You've got the fans, like, I feel like it is wrestling and comics, superhero comics especially, are one and the same.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And yeah, you talk about the mask never comes off. I mean, El Santo unmasked and 2 weeks later he passes away.
10 days.
10 days. 10 days
after he unmasked, because he'd been retired for a couple of years at that point, and he figured, what's the big deal? And it's funny, if you watch the video where he's unmasking himself on the talk show, the audience gasps, like they know who he is. We don't need to see your face. And then he does it. And then 10 days later, he had a heart attack. And when they buried him with the mask on, because I guess you don't want to take any chances. I love that when he showed up in the movie
feedback
Coco.
been for Dragon Lee?
Yeah, it's been great. I've been enjoying the feedback.
Oh, I did not know he showed up there.
Yeah, he's there's one quick scene in Coco where he shows up and he's wearing the mask as a skeleton. So of course he is. But yeah, if you look in the background of Coco, those are all characters from pop culture, Mexican pop culture, which is really great. But like Cantinflas is there. Anyway, the feedback's been great. Everybody who has read it has given me a really good feedback. When I wrote it, I teach high school as well, right? And when I wrote it with my students in mind, because I see my students, they're always trying to read books that they think are higher than their level. So this is aimed at middle schoolers, but I wrote it with high school in mind. So the idea is the kids would be kind of reading up to it. And the feedback's been good. I always tell people I want negative feedback. If you don't like something, tell me. I will not, be offended. Maybe I follow it next time I write. Maybe I don't. But either way, I like hearing it. But no, I've only gotten good feedback. I think the biggest thing, though, is that if people are not already familiar with the wrestler, they might not want to pick it up thinking, oh, it's a wrestling book. And I'm like, it's a wrestling book, but it's a wrestling culture and story. And it's about Mexican culture and history. So that's why, I'm really proud of it.
Okay.
It was number one for several months in Amazon in Mexico in their middle reader section. It'll be specific with all those things, but yes, it was,
Well, that's a cool title to have, if you will. Number one on Amazon, because there's not too many people that can say that. Well, let's talk about a couple of your other projects. Let's talk about, and I'm going to do my best with some of these names, and I do humbly apologize if I mess them up.
Sometimes we got to workshop the names better.
Well, let's talk about, is it pronounced, let's see, Konoha?
Okay, so Coneja is from Chispa Comics. Yeah, Coneja. It just means rabbit in Spanish, bunny. Think of it like Usagi from Sailor Moon. That one was not, the name didn't come from me. It's from Chispa Comics, which is a comic book company that at the time was working with Scout Comics. Now they're working with Amp Comics. But Chispa is a Latino owned and operated company. The idea is to have Latina creators and characters, put out there more, because you don't see them a lot in, the big two companies. But but it was part of a project called the 13, and the idea was that there'd be 13 heroes, each born on a different day, because in the Mesoamerican calendar, the Aztec calendar, there are 13 numbers and 20 nouns that combine to make your birthday. So, for example, I was born on the day of 6 Jaguar. So Coneja was born on the day of 13 Rabbit. Unfortunately, due to some behind-the-scenes stuff that had nothing to do with the books themselves, Coneja has not seen print yet, even though it's been done for a few years. I've been told it will be released sometime in spring, but that's all I've got so far. But I was really proud of it. In fact, the artist that I'm working with, Martha Ortiz, I've since invited her to another project I got hired for that I'm working on right now. So I want her to get more jobs because I really like what she did with Coneja. And so now I'm working with her on another project, which is interestingly about another wrestler, but we're not ready to talk about that yet.
Well, how important is it to find that good mix? Like when you are looking for an artist, just how much of that is mega important to you?
Oh, it's 100% important. A major part of it is how well do people gel together? But when you're talking about professionally, it's just that's not as vital as the product, I think, necessarily, because like if somebody's being professional, you don't necessarily need to become best friends or anything. Like with Martha Ortiz, we don't really talk outside of our work, but we work together well. What I think is most important is having an artist and a writer match the project. So like for Coneja, the goal, in fact, they gave me a list of characters that I could pick from, and I picked her specifically because the description just said Latina Squirrel Girl. Latina Squirrel Girl with rabbit powers. And I was like, yeah, that one. I want that one. And I'm like, if I'm doing Latina Squirrel Girl, then I want to have somebody that has kind of like a webtoons aesthetic, And so I immediately thought of Martha because her art style is very much very much that kind of the anime inspired but Western influenced art style, and it worked really well for that. I think she's on Instagram at Pastel de Soriana, which yes, it's in Spanish. She's from right across the border from where I'm at. Actually, I'm from South Texas and she's from North Mexico. But yeah, I think that's super important. So if I'm writing a story that is a little bit more technical, then I would like to have somebody that has that heavy detail. If I'm writing a story that's more fantastical or superhero wise, I want somebody that can do colorful costumes, and so on. I think it's really, really important that the art matches the story. In fact, I've even met artists where I'm like, I don't have something for you right now, but when I look at your art style, I got an idea, so that's always cool.
War?
Yeah.
Can you give us a little summary?
Yeah, World's War Comics. Yeah. So World's War Comics, which yes, is kind of clunky to say, I admit. I always tell people it's very important to have a good title, and yet I don't think any of my books have really amazing titles. I need to work on that. But yeah, World's War Comics. The idea came to me a while back. It's kind of a straightforward superhero story, but you don't need to know anything about the characters. Basically, it's a book with heroes from World War II in the present day, looking back on their lives and making a documentary about the war. The idea being is that even decades later, there's still trauma there because it's a war. So there's going to be trauma. And when I originally started putting this together, I was just going to make up pastiche characters that were just similar, but not quite, other characters. But then I realized this is a story about history. So I thought it was important that the characters have history. So you don't need to know who they are to read it. I mean, one guy's wearing a flag, and one guy's wearing dark clothing and sneaking in the shadows, and one guy's shirtless and has a weird colored skin and a bunch of muscles. You understand who these guys are, right? But they are actually all characters from the 30s, 40s, and 50s that are from the public domain. So in the back of the book, I put, who these characters are, who the creators were, what stories I suggest you read, and where to find them for free. This is just my version of those characters. So in other words, if you don't want to know the history, you don't have to. The story works by itself. But if you wanted to know more, these characters have a full history. In fact, something since that project, I've been thinking a lot more about the idea of having characters connected to real world history. I'd done it before that too, but after that, it became kind of a driving force where I like the idea of having characters that that feel like they have a history beyond the book that I'm putting out. So that even though this story here is just about those people remembering the war, there is a history behind it that I think helps give it weight if you wanted it to. And I've actually been giving a bunch of talks lately about how to use public domain and what that means for your own projects. Yeah, it's tricky to say in English, but Teoat just basically means holy water, you know. So it's the thing about the story is this is the first one I did all, self-published, I guess. And I worked with a couple of different artists on that too. But with Teoat, the idea was kind of twofold. First, I was tired of seeing stories about Mesoamerica, Maya, Aztecs, or even going to South America, talking about the Inca, where all of those stories always tied back to Spain in some way. Like there's the movie Apocalypto, which is entirely done in indigenous languages, but at the end of the movie, spoilers, the Spanish saved the day. And I didn't want that. So I set the book 300 years, or 200 years, I guess, before any Spaniards ever came nearby. And then the other aspect of it is that I see that people, nowadays, especially thanks to the movies, that people know the name of Thor's hammer and that people know who Hercules' dad is, but why don't you know the name of Huitzilopochtli's weapon? I think that would be really cool to have these greater mythologies, the greater stories and religions become part of the world's popular culture. So I wanted to approach the story as if it was a sword and sorcery, like adventure story. But it is also with real history. Every single character that is named in the book is somebody who we know was alive in the Valley of Mexico in 1325, because they kept really good records. So I have about 30 names to play with there, and histories of their families and everything else. And it's set before the founding of what we would call the Aztec Empire. So it is the origin of the city Tenochtitlan, which today is Mexico City. And if you've seen the Mexican flag or any pesos, you've seen the eagle on the cactus, right? The thing is that that's the end of the story. There is so much that happened building up to that's the story I wanted to tell, based on oral traditions and stories and legends that were collected together. And I was going to combine them into one solid narrative with a main character that is somebody important from history. I consider Teoat to be kind of like a proof of concept. So my plan is to go in later as a full graphic novel, probably change the name of it, find an editor who's very familiar with the material as well, to make sure it's as respectful and authentic as possible. But my goal would be to have a full story where it isn't until the last chapter that they see the eagle on the cactus. Because again, there's so much that leads up to it.
Cool. Well, let's transition from comics for a moment to podcasting, because you are a part of the My Primos Podcast.
Yes, I am. And thank you for bringing that up. I always think it's important podcasters kind of support each other,
Yeah, absolutely. I don't understand those that have an adversarial type of meaning. It's weird, like we're all out here doing our own thing, man.
Yeah.
So what would an individual, if they tuned into My Primos Podcast, what would they hear? What's a typical episode like?
So the tagline we give it is that it's pop culture from a Latine perspective. So we are all, Latinos, Latinas, Latine. We are, I'm Mexican American. The guy that founded the show is Salvadoran American. And then we have people from, all over Latin America and with their ancestry or themselves that have become part of the show. And we talk about whatever feels right in pop culture. So very often it is also things involving Latino or Latina creators or properties, like Chispa Comics, but it isn't just that. It's we've interviewed directors of indie films and actors and researchers and writers of books and a lot of people in comics, because it's fun, and also people who make video games, because it's not about only spotlighting one culture and also not trying to present Latinos as a monolith either, but it's about showing that there is an audience that wants to take in this pop culture and what we'd like to get out of it. Lately, we've been doing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, where we have our all the main hosts have our characters, and one of our hosts is the Dungeon Master, and he's been leading us through. And the Dungeon Master, by the way, Johnny Avina of Avina Comics, I put out maybe a book or two a year. He puts out like a dozen or more a year. It's crazy. But one of his many books is specifically about a family that gets trapped in a Dungeons and Dragons game. So it's like some fun cross promotion there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know what? I have to mention this here because I just am a huge fan of the material. But while looking at your Instagram, you did a quick little video talking about the 2099 universe.
Yeah, I did.
I love the 2099 universe, except for Ravage. Ravage was poor. Could have been something great, but they screwed that up.
If I can say one thing about Ravage, he is the last original character that Stan Lee officially co-created per Marvel.
Oh, yeah.
So, yes, he's not a great character, but, he's got that on him at least.
I loved Doom, and I loved the Punisher, 2099. Yeah. And Spider-Man was great.
Yeah. Doom was great. Spider-Man was great. My favorite, though, was the Ghost Rider, 2099, especially... it really petered off after about 15 issues or so, but the beginning of it was so good. It started so strong. And what ruined it was crossovers. Whenever they started doing the company-wide 2099 crossovers, his own story got derailed and it never got back on the track. So, but it was such a good story. You have this guy who is a disaffected young person who sees corporations manipulating the government. And whenever he tries to do anything about it, the corporations shut down the ability of people to share this information on the internet. The ones who control it, they control the media. They tell the media to kill stories if they don't think it's going to help their profits. And of course, thankfully, our world is nothing like that. But
what?
but my point is, it's a really good story, and it's really, really prescient. And in fact, going through it again for that video, I noticed there were terms in that video that were used in their modern meaning, but didn't have that meaning in the 90s, which is interesting. Like he uses the word, he says the dark memes at some point. And now we think of meme as just being like a shared joke, but the term meme to having its original meaning, or its current meaning rather, came just about a year or so before that book came out. And it definitely hadn't been used a lot in referring to things on the internet yet. So it's interesting to see it in this book from the early 90s. So that's cool. Lynn Kamansky's a great writer, actually. But yeah, one thing I did with the videos is always trying to find something obscure, mostly Marvel, but something obscure to talk about, because I think there's just so much out there that deserves a second look, you know?
Yeah, I enjoyed the other one too, and I can't remember. There was a telephone superhero that was A.G. Bell.
Yeah, and his name is the Phone Ranger.
The Phone Ranger, that's right. I couldn't remember it.
Now, just to be clear, he was not intended to be a serious character. Originally, he was created as a joke in a joke book. But then they gave the handbook team the opportunity to write his profile. We're like, can we? And can we put him in the real world? And they said, in the real Marvel world, I mean, not the real world. And they were like, sure. So now he's officially canon. And because it was in the handbook, well, the writers were like, cool, we can use him now. So the writers used him, and now he's officially part of the Marvel Universe. Most recently, kind of a member of the Avengers, at least for 2 issues. So that's neat. One of the videos I did a long time ago is currently getting a resurgence. Do you play Marvel Rivals?
No.
Yeah, see, I played it a bit. I'm not really great at those kind of games, so I played a bit, but visually I love it, and I love that there's bits of lore in the background. Well, I asked somebody, why is this old video appearing? And they go, oh, because of the new skin that Adam Warlock is wearing. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Because I have a video. Let me ask you a quick question.
Sure.
Your knowledge of Marvel, whatever it is. Who have you been told, or who do you think is the most powerful being in the Marvel Universe?
I think that there would be a good argument for Thanos.
I can see that. Yeah, he's taken on gods and universes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would probably go with him.
I like that. Probably the most powerful one from Earth is the little baby in the most recent Fantastic Four movie, which is interesting. But usually the one I see on the internet as being the strongest fighter or whatever is the one above all. And that's basically Marvel's creator deity of the multiverse, essentially. But I don't consider him a fighter because he doesn't get involved in fights. So it's like I don't get involved in fights with fleas. They're just there, you know? Yeah. But the one who does the fighting on behalf of the one above all is the Living Tribunal. So if you remember Thanos getting the Infinity Gauntlet and he just, wiped the floor with the Avengers and all that stuff, the Living Tribunal, when Thanos attacked, or not Thanos, but when somebody else used the Infinity Gauntlet against the Living Tribunal did that, and the Infinity Gauntlet turned off. He is the most powerful fighter in the multiverse of Marvel because he fights on behalf of God, essentially. He's the judge to decide what is bad or good for the multiverse. But he has been defeated once or twice. Usually it's for a lesson. Like he allowed himself to be defeated by Doctor Strange so Doctor Strange could get confidence, that kind of stuff. But he was ultimately killed. He's the only one in all of the multiverse for Marvel, but he was killed by the Beyonders. Now, each Beyonder is a universe. So if you think about Hulk being the strongest one or whatever, Hulk lives in a universe. So the Beyonder is an entire universe. All right. And there was an army of Beyonders that took out the Living Tribunal. And after he died, the multiverse was destroyed and recreated in Secret Wars, soon coming to a theater near you. And after it was over, there was a need for a new Living Tribunal. And the guy that created Thanos, Jim Starlin, the writer-artist that created him, wrote a story where Adam Warlock, at least a version of him, became the new Living Tribunal. Although the only one in the entire multiverse that knows the true identity, aside from himself, is Thanos, which I find fascinating because it's never come up again. So the idea that they would put this all-powerful look onto the Adam Warlock player character is really interesting to me. Again, he does lose on purpose sometimes, but the Doctor Strange movie, the first one that came out, every time they have an item, they give it a name of a god or something, right? And that's usually powered by that god. But there's one point where Mordo pulls up a stick and he goes, "This is the staff of the Living Tribunal." And I mean, admittedly, I'm a nerd, but in the audience, I'm like, like, what does that mean? Because like he's never blessed any items before, and he's the most powerful being. What the hell can that staff do? And it's never been in the comics. It has since shown up in the comics, and they said it could destroy the multiverse. So there you go. But like, I just thought that was a neat little, a touch of weird bits of Marvel lore that all tie together in one way or another.
Well, who are some of your favorites? Because obviously you're a comic book fan. So who are some of your superheroes or personalities that you really like?
For a long time, I would tell people that I couldn't pick a favorite child, right?
Right.
But eventually I realized, no, I do have a favorite. And it's admittedly a weird one, but everybody's got their like, oh, that's my ride or die, I guess. Namor the Submariner, the bad guy from Wakanda Forever. The thing about him is he is the first ever Marvel superhero. He and the original Human Torch showed up in Marvel Comics #1, but his story was written months earlier, set to be published months earlier, so he's the first. He's also the first ever Marvel supervillain. He would fight Nazis one day and attack New York the next day. Like, he was constantly causing trouble. He is the reason the Marvel Universe, and in fact, he's the reason any comic book universe exists. Because back in the 30s and 40s, superheroes had their own individual stories. They didn't cross over. Batman had adventures, Superman had adventures. Sometimes they'd be on the cover together, but they didn't meet in the book. The first time they did that was because Namor just kept attacking New York. So the other Marvel creators were like, can we just have our guys fight him? And so they went to stop him. And that was the creation of the Marvel Universe. Like, that started because Human Torch had to stop him from fighting New York. And so that's really cool. But it gets further. He's also the first superhero of any comic book company to fly under his own power. Superman used to leap tall buildings. Namor could fly from, I think, issue 2 or 3. He was already doing it, just flying off. So he's got all that going for him. Also, from a selfish point of view, I'm somebody of mixed heritage. So I've had the issue of being, not Mexican enough for Mexicans and not white enough for white people. It's happened before. And Namor of the comics was the first and maybe only time I've really seen that struggle feel authentic. That I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly what it feels like, what he goes through. Which is why I'm sad that when they changed him up for the movie, I didn't mind most of the changes are fine. Like the nationality stuff, that I got a whole reason why that makes sense in the comics. But losing that mixed heritage part, that personally hurt me, but it doesn't affect the story for the movie. But yeah, he was mine in that way, I guess.
Okay, cool. All right, before we start wrapping things up here, I've been asked by my producer real quick to just mention that, again, for you folks that are interested in checking out a pretty cool convention, there is one happening here real soon. It's called Mockingbird Lane, and it's happening in
Seguin,
San Antonio.
Oh, it says that.
There's going to be so many.
Sorry, it's San Antonio. I thought it was in Seguin. I need to double check that. I'm going to double check real quick. It is in San Antonio now. Okay, it was originally going to be held in Seguin, which is a small town between San Antonio and Austin, but it's going to be in San Antonio proper now. All right, cool. I'm going to be there. I've been planning to be there since they first started planning this, but I've had a lot of stuff going on. I didn't realize we had a new location. So yes, San Antonio, Texas. Come and be there.
Yep, definitely. It's the 27th to 29th through the 29th of this month. Yes. It's an immersive art celebration of just cool black and white cinema, films that were oddball or offbeat, just a variety of things that are going on down there with lots of great guests. You need to check it out, Mockingbird Lane. If you want more information. Go ahead, Kevin.
Sorry. Oh, I was going to say the reason it's called Mockingbird Lane is because it's one of the founders is the guy that played Eddie Munster in the Munsters. Mockingbird Lane is where the Munsters were located. So that's really cool.
Yeah. So if you want some more information, just go over to the Mockingbird Lane, the Mockingbird Lane. I can't say it.com, or check them out on Facebook. Like I said, it's coming in a couple of weeks. You definitely want to make it out there to the Hilton Garden Inn live, and again in San Antonio. So, Kevin, as we start to wrap things up here, is there anything coming down the pike that you would like to talk about in terms of like projects, or maybe you mentioned that you'd like to be at certain conventions?
Yeah, well, I've got
appearing.
Yeah, well, I've got Mockingbird Lane coming up, obviously, which I'm really excited for. The week after that, I'm planning to be in California, Modesto, California, for the Latinx Comics Arts Festival, which is something that I'm been really excited about because I do a lot of the Latino Comic Cons here in Texas, but I've never done the one in California or any of the ones in California, rather. So they invited me to go, and I'm like, I have to be there. And then I've got a few others after that where I'm definitely planning to do things. I'll be doing something in Austin probably for Free Comic Book Day, that kind of stuff. Most likely, I'll be doing some panels at San Diego Comic Con. I did that last year, and I'll probably do some this year. And I've got a project that hasn't been announced yet that I'm working on, but I've got some pictures of it. I'm still kind of working with it. Just pointing that out.
Okay, well. Well, Kevin, thanks again for sitting down and chatting with me tonight. I do appreciate it. And before we forget, I almost forgot, social media. Where can folks follow you online?
Yes, I am. I own KevinGarcia.com. So all the other Kevin Garcias, sorry, you can suck it. You have to add something else to your name. But because of that, I've decided that most of my social media handles are going to be Kevin Garcia _com, COM. They wouldn't let me put dot in some of them, so I put underscore instead. So the only one that doesn't have, so that's me on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube. The only one that doesn't is Blue Sky, which is Kevin Garcia, because they wouldn't let me do an underscore. So I was like, yeah, that's fine. But yeah, I got all that.
Folks, follow Kevin and keep tabs on what he's working on. And Kevin, with that, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm glad to have been a fourth geek with 1/3 of the geeks.
There you go.
Yeah, that sounds good. Math is not my strong suit, but that sounds right.
Same here. I'll go with you on that. But folks, thanks again, and we'll see you real soon.